Innuendo, Book 5 of the Todd Mills Mystery Series. Author, R.D. Zimmerman. Publisher, Scribble Pub Press, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Narrator, Eric Aust. Chapter 42. Todd couldn't say that he wasn't glad to be back in the Yellow Brick Mansion, but he certainly hadn't expected to be back here so soon. It was just after 8. They sat again on the couch in the huge living room, and the thing that scared Todd about Tim Chase was how attentive he was. It was no wonder everyone fell in love with him, as Todd sensed he himself was now doing. And when Tim poured him a glass of Cabernet, Todd felt like the most important person on the planet. But how was that possible? How could someone like Tim Chase give a rat's ass about him? Todd Mills, an investigative television reporter from Flyover Land. After all, this guy swooning over him was a superstar. This is my favorite cab, said Tim as he put the bottle on the coffee table and moved closer to Todd. Todd glanced at the bottle and knew from the label that it had cost over $200. Perhaps that was pocket change to Tim, but... So, how? Todd couldn't help but wonder, was this going to go tonight? Would this be a simple continuation of last night's foray? Or... Tim Chase reached over and squeezed Todd's shoulder. You're a good guy, Todd Mills. Todd was melting right there on the couch, of course, but proving true to his Midwestern roots, he held back and simply asked, Why do you say that? Chase laughed. Because you're a nice guy, because you have people swarming over you all the time. Surely some of them are decent. Yeah, but none of them are genuine. None of them are real. Actually, most of them are fools. Can I take that as a compliment? Absolutely. Staring straight into Tim Chase's eyes, Todd saw it again, that unbearable sense of loneliness. Todd knew only too well what it was like to be on display day after day, to be judged by your image, and to have any number of people ready at any moment to proclaim your fall. But Tim Chase's life had to be a million times worse. Todd reached over and patted Tim on the knee, a gesture that made the star smile, almost sadly. Tim ventured, Like I said, I have very few safe harbors. This was playing with fire, and it was right then that Todd knew he shouldn't have come. No, the cost was going to be too much, for his soul would be paying for this for months, if not years. Only the sound of voices from the hall roused Tim from a near sense of melancholy, and he said, Come on. Setting down their glasses of wine, they crossed the large living room to the entry hall, where they found the 3 other members of Tim Chase's small tribe. Gwen Owens and Maggie, holding little Jack by each hand, were just making their way to the front door. Daddy! Shouted the boy. We're getting ice cream. You are? Yeah, and we're walking. Well, you be good. Todd watched as Tim gave Gwen a light kiss on the cheek, then gently roughed his son's hair. Gwen, wearing a light brown suede coat, turned to Todd and said, I don't think Jack has actually walked anywhere before, certainly not from our house in L.A. Well, have fun. And you too, she said with a smirk. Maggie looked at Todd with a kind of welcoming smile and said, Nice to see you again. Likewise. Todd noticed that even though it was almost dark, Gwen had a pair of large sunglasses perched atop her head. He presumed she never went anywhere without them, her makeshift disguise. Like a doting husband and father, Tim ushered the little trio out the door, bid them well, then turned back to Todd, another huge grin on his face. Alone at last. Todd's stomach flinched. Really? Yep, the cook, the trainer, and obviously Vic, they're all gone. Oh my God, it's unbelievable. It's just us. Tim, what's that mean? What do you want from me? So many questions. But, shh, said Tim, coming over and placing his right forefinger on Todd's lips. The next moment, Tim moved even closer, reaching out and pulling Todd into his embrace. Todd held back, determined not to fall, at least not so quickly, so easily. Todd asked, Are you going to call this research again? Like I said, so many questions. Somewhat reluctantly, Todd let himself be pulled and enfolded into Tim Chase's arms. But was it lust? Was it want on Tim's part, or just some big game? Todd reached out and embraced Tim, too, hugging him, feeling that powerful back, as if in reply. Tim started trembling, a deep, slow, but steady vibration that came from a pained corner deep inside him. "Hey, are you okay?" asked Todd, holding him tighter. Tim's head, tucked against Todd's neck, went up and down. "I'm gay." So there it was. The fog of deceit had lifted, exposing that very vulnerable truth, and he replied, "Of course." Todd rubbed Tim's back, tried to pass from his flesh through Tim's some of the strength, some of the wisdom, and some of the pride that Todd was still discovering day after day. Yes, whatever label he chose to wear, Tim Chase, America's hunk and idol, and one of the top-grossing actors in the world, was by no means straight, his lips having just betrayed the secret that Hollywood moguls and public relations firms had worked so hard to conceal. His words, all but a whisper into Tim's ear. Todd asked, "Does your wife care?" "Off the record?" "Yes, you fool, of course." Softly, easily, and without pretense, Tim said, "Gwen's gay, too. Maggie's her partner, not our nanny. They've been together for 9 years, longer than we've been married." "No shit?" "Yeah." Stripped of his image, Tim fell completely into Todd's arms, just an ordinary person, full of passion, desperate for touch, hungry for love. Todd tilted his head back as the firm lips came up his neck, over his chin, to his mouth. Yes, Todd realized he very well might leap off a cliff for this guy. You know," whispered Tim in Todd's ear, "I've been looking for someone like you." Most definitely. Todd could tumble real hard, real fast. So there it was. Tim and Gwen, America's leading husband and wife actors, were nothing less than a queen and a dyke. They obviously loved each other very much, just as they were devoted to their little boy. Tim was also obviously quite fond of Maggie, and this whole situation seemed to work quite well for all of them. It was quite simply a logical solution to a horribly complicated situation. Unable to rein in his eternal curiosity, Todd asked, "What about your son? Are you his biological father?" "Absolutely." "So you've been to bed with her?" "Gwen?" He laughed. "Oh, God, no. She wouldn't have me, and I couldn't get it up for her. We love each other, but we just don't work like that. That's a turkey baster, baby." "Are you serious?" "Of course. We had a doctor do it and everything, but he then took Todd's right hand and placed it on his own swollen crotch. Enough of that stuff. Now, come on, let's go finish our wine on the patio and then see what happens." And Todd knew where this was going to lead, just as he knew there was no turning back. Not now, not tonight, and so he waited while the actor fetched their glasses, then silently followed Tim through the grand hall and down the staircase. A few long and divinely tense moments later, they entered the tiled pool room. Tonight, Tim didn't turn on the brass sconces surrounding the pool, but instead lit 3 fat candles next to the whirlpool, and tonight he didn't pull shut the blinds covering the French doors that led outside, but rather threw open the doors. He next picked up his glass of wine, then turned to Todd, and in the faint light smiled simply and easily. Taking 3 steps, he was next to Todd, kissing him on the neck and taking him by the hand. "Come on, let's go outside." "But aren't you worried? Aren't you?" "Shh, it's okay," said Tim, kissing him one more time. "I mean, it's not okay, but I can only take it so much." "On your scale, it must be awful." He shrugged. "It's a decision I made, and now I'm pretty much used to it, but every now and then I just got to get out and be myself. Come on." When Todd felt Tim's lips nibbling his ear, he realized that he could easily follow him anywhere and do anything. It was cool outside and dark. The dry fall leaves rustled overhead in a gentle wind, and Todd peered up at the sky and saw a sprinkling of stars emerging as the evening faded into night. Standing on the slat patio that was surrounded by a low stone wall, Todd sipped his wine and looked out over the backyard, which fell away, cascading down a hill that was covered with a jungle of bushes. "I spend so much of my time inside and behind closed windows, just so people won't see me," said Tim in a giddy, almost nervous voice. "That's sometimes it. It makes me go absolutely nuts." Todd turned around to see him frantically going after the buttons of his shirt and ripping them open. Seconds later, he yanked off his shirt and threw it high overhead. The next instant, he grabbed at his belt buckle and pulled it away, unfastened his pants, and ripped down the zipper. He hopped around as he pulled off his pants and his socks, then stood there in white boxer shorts. Todd glanced across the yard, wondered if anyone was lurking out there. "Tim, aren't you a little worried that anyone out there?" he shouted with a whoop. "This is your chance to see Tim Chase buck naked." "But don't worry," he said out of the corner of his mouth. "Anybody snaps a picture of me and I'll sue him." With that, he grabbed at his underwear, yanked it down, and kicked it away, standing straight up. He clenched his fist and stretched them to the sky. Then, as if he were running in place, did a little dance and whooped yet again. Stripped and exposed, the superstar then ran over to the low stone wall, jumped up, and ran along the top of it, laughing and yelping. "Here I am! Anyone want to see? Come and get it! Fresh Chase! Fresh Tim Chase!" Todd, holding his wine glass, stood there as Tim came charging along the stone wall and all but threw himself against Todd with little choice. Todd tossed his nearly full glass over the wall and into the grass and grabbed Tim, who atop the wall stood a good foot and a half above him, unable to stop himself. Todd wrapped his arms around the top of Tim's thighs and buried his face into the smooth, hard chest. How was he supposed to resist? Better yet, wouldn't he be a fool if he did? "I'm glad we met," said Tim, bending forward and kissing Todd on the crown of his head. "You seem very real to me," rubbing his face deep into Tim's chest and running a hand up his ass. Todd mumbled, "Yeah, well, you don't." Seemingly out of nowhere, Todd asked, "Let me ask you this. What do you do for sex? I mean, how does someone so famous, so recognizable, get laid?" "Well, yeah. That's Victor's department. He always finds me the best. Like Andrew." "Well, aren't you the nosy one?" He laughed, then lunged forward, smashing his crotch against Todd's clothed chest. "Enough of your questions, all right?" "Sure." Todd kissed him on the stomach, then stood back up and kissed him on one nipple next the other. "Come on," said Tim, pulling slightly away. "Let's go inside and finish what we started last night." Thinking he heard something off in the bushes, Todd glanced around, then replied, "Sure." Todd didn't put up the least bit of resistance as Tim, naked and taunting, took Todd by the hand and led him across the patio and through the open French doors. As they entered the candlelit pool room, Todd's heart began to beat in nervous anticipation. He reached out for Tim and pulled him right against him, and they kissed long and hard, deep, firmly and slowly. Todd ran his hand up and down Tim's muscular back, and Tim grabbed Todd's shirt, pulled at it, popping away 3 buttons, and then reaching inside and desperately waving his hand over the hair on Todd's chest. "I want you," whispered Tim, "and I hope you want me too." "Absolutely," trying to express his last bit of hesitation, Todd said. "It's just..." "Shh. You're with me now, so relax. Just relax and forget about that other guy, okay?" The next instant, Tim spun away, trotting across the tiled decking and to a stack of towels in the dim light. Todd watched as he reached into the subtle folds of terry cloth and pulled out something black. Holding out a mask, Tim said, "Here, I want you to put this on." "What?" "Please, just put it on and let me do everything. Let me undress you. Let me take you all the way." It wasn't a Halloween disguise, a black mask with slits cut for the eyes. No, it was a black blindfold with an elastic band. "Are you sure?" said Todd. "Absolutely. It'll heighten all your other senses, particularly your sense of touch. Here, let me do it." "Well..." Todd lowered his head slightly and let Tim slip it on, placing the mask over his eyes and the band around the back of his head. In an instant, the soft light disappeared and Todd tumbled into a world of darkness. Blindly reaching out, he groped for Tim's arm. "Okay, now what?" "Just let me do it all." Vulnerable and helpless, Todd stood there as Tim started kissing his neck as lightly as a manic butterfly. An instant later, he sensed one of Chase's meaty hands painfully flutter across his crotch. Blindfolded though he was, Todd saw it all in the darkness of his mind's eye, and he rode that vibrant image, that wild ride of lust, seen but not seen, witnessing but not as Tim Chase, naked and stoked to the max, hovered all over and around him. It was more than Todd could bear, and he naturally reached up, begging to stroke the body and the tool, lingering just inches before him. Firmly pushing his hand away, Chase, his voice deep and dark, said, "You can't do anything. I'm in charge." As unbearable as it was, Todd simply stood there as Tim slowly peeled the last of his shirt from his body, dropping on the floor, and then he let himself be led along, followed deeper into this black charade. Shh, just do as I say. Sit down. Blindly complying, Todd let Tim lower him to the floor, where he sat on a long cushion. Tim then pushed him back, forcing him to lie, and started fumbling with Todd's belt. Todd reached down to help to speed up this painfully slow process. Batting away Todd's hand, Tim shouted, "I'm in charge!" In an instant, Todd understood just how terrified Chase was of how people would see him. Hence, the blindfold. I can see you, you can't see me. Hence, the control. I'll say when and where and why. Oh, God. He thought about Rawlins, where they were headed or weren't. Everything between them had been so perfect, until a farm boy and an actor had come into their lives and thrown everything askew. And now this. His conscience pathetically moaned as his body beaded with silky sweat. What was he doing? Why the hell had he agreed to come here? But then, of course, Tim rubbed that smooth, gorgeous face on the hair around and above Todd's navel, and Todd was right back there, right back in a whirlpool of lust, and before Todd knew it, Tim was pinning Todd's arms up and behind his head and mounting Todd. Todd heard it first, the sound of footsteps on the patio. He flinched, struggled to get up, but Tim forced him down. "I've got you! But don't move!" And then a voice behind both of them loudly ordered, "That's right, don't move! Don't either one of you fucking move an inch!" But Tim did just that. He rolled off Todd, grabbed a towel, clumsily wrapping it around his waist. "I mean it, Tim. Just stay right there or I'll blow your fucking brains out." Todd ripped off the blindfold and sat up. A dark, unseen figure stood in the doorway, the gun in his hand, perfectly obvious. Todd couldn't see the face, but of course it was him. Of course, he'd come spying on them. "This time you're not going to get away with it, Tim. You're not going to pin it on someone like Vic. Don't be ridiculous. You're not going to get away with it because when you fucked Andrew, you left your sperm and your hair and your stupid fingerprints all over him. And everything else in that rat hole of an apartment. I know how you work, Tim. I know very well." "Fuck you. You can't bring boys to your own house because someone might see. So Vic finds them, blindfolds them, and then you screw them and walk away." Todd's eyes were trained on the figure as it moved into the pool room, and as the dim light began to glow on the handsome face of Tim Chase's former lover, Rob Scott. Yes, it was exactly as Todd had surmised after seeing his picture in the National Times. "I knew you'd do something like that, Tim, like screw Andrew Lyman," said Scott, amused by his own brilliance. "So I stole your knife, and then I waited, and followed you, and did the terrible little deed moments after you left. You bastard! Actually, I thought it was kind of brilliant. Unfortunately, the police are about to arrest the wrong guy, so I'm going to have to do it again. I'm going to have to kill your little fuck buddy here, only this time I'm going to do it a little differently. I'm not only going to kill this guy you're about to screw, I'm going to kill you too. That way there'll be no questions at all. It'll be perfectly clear to the cops, and eventually they'll blame you for that kid's death too. Isn't that great? In the end of ends, the world's going to learn exactly what I learned. That their hero's not only a faggot, but a real son of a bitch. What do you think of that? Hey." Todd didn't doubt him, not for an instant. He could hear the desperation in his voice, sense the determination in his stance. Ah, shit. Why had he ever gotten involved with Tim Chase in the first place? Taking another step into the pool room, Rob Scott trained his gun on Todd and said, "You know, I'm going to like doing this. It's always been a fantasy of mine. Granted, a dark one. To walk in and find my lover screwing someone else. I always pictured myself going ballistic, which is exactly what I'm going to do. Ta-ta, Todd. You're first. It's been nice knowing you, however brief. Todd's body flash flooded with panic. No, this wasn't supposed to happen. No way. This wasn't part of the plan. They talked it through, worked out every detail, tried to anticipate how it might come down, and things definitely weren't supposed to go this far. Yet apparently they'd misjudged, horribly so, and rolling on his side, Todd curled into a ball, and the very next second there was indeed a blast of a gun, the sound of which exploded in the room. Todd shouted out, braced himself for the agonizing pain. Instead, there was nothing. As his pulse roared and sweat beaded on his forehead, Todd looked over at Tim, who stood paralyzed, the towel tight now around his waist. Todd then looked at the figure of Rob Scott, who stumbled back, grabbed for one of the French doors, and finally fell to the tile floor and lay there, quite still. Seeing two men rush from the patio into the room, Todd shouted, "Shit, Rawlings, I thought you were going to let him really do it!" While Foster, his gun still drawn, stopped at the body, Rawlings rushed straight to Todd. "You okay?" demanded Rawlings. Nodding as he climbed to his feet, Todd replied, "Yeah, but that was hard, knowing that you were out there watching the whole time." Grabbing Todd's forearm and giving it a good solid squeeze, he said, "Well, I have to tell you, it wasn't easy watching. I'll have to say this much, you're not a bad actor." Most of it was, of course, an act. A good part of it wasn't, but Todd would tell Rawlings that later, just as he knew Rawlings would understand, and he would, wouldn't he? Turning around, Todd saw the lifeless body of Tim Chase's former lover, Rob Scott, sprawled on the floor. Foster, who was kneeling and pressing his hand against the man's neck, looked up and shook his head. "He's gone." "Oh, God," moaned Tim, turning away. "I didn't want it to end like this. I really didn't." "Of course not," said Todd. Tim covered his eyes with his right hand, and Todd broke away from Rawlings and went to the actor, putting his arms around him. "I'm sorry." He just went crazy," mumbled Tim through his grief. "At first, we were good, really good. There was Rob and me and Maggie and Gwen. I thought we had everything, that we had it all figured out. I don't know. I guess I was gone too much. Spent too much time on the sets. I guess I was too involved in myself. Rob got into a fast crowd out there in L.A. He got into coke and then into some really hard stuff. I tried to help him. I did what I could. I really did. I'm sure. But he just spent everything on drugs. I told him he had to stop, that he had to get into a treatment program, but finally I had to throw him out. I just had to cut him off." Which was when Tim had told Todd and Rawlings earlier today Rob Scott had gone to the National Times and sold his story. Not only was he desperate for money, he was desperate and determined to get revenge by outing Tim Chase and ruining him completely. And in a very real way, Tim Chase was ruined. For if he was fearful before, he was ultra-paranoid now, terrified of intimacy. There'd been no witness, no paparazzi-style photographer who'd spied Vic's comings and goings. There'd only been Rob Scott, posing as such and trying his best to manipulate the sequence of events. Yes, it was clear now that Rob Scott had stolen Tim's fishing knife, used it to kill Andrew Lyman, and then returned the bloody thing to Tim's Land Rover, watching what Tim would do, how he would handle the situation. Rob had then followed Vic down to Lake Harriet, where he'd seen the bodyguard throw the weapon in the lake, and then, holding Tim in his arms, Todd thought how it might very well have worked, too. It most certainly could have, if the WLAK camera hadn't caught one particular person on the banks of the lake when the sheriff's team had been diving for the knife. Todd had studied the video of that day, of course, and had searched the faces of the onlookers. But he hadn't known who was who until he'd seen the photographs of Rob Scott in the back issues of the National Times. Realizing it was obviously more than a coincidence that Tim Chase's lover from California would be in Minneapolis, let alone down at Lake Harriet, Todd had called Rawlings, surmising that Andrew Lyman's murder might very well be the work of a jealous man bent on destroying his former lover, which he'd already tried to do by cooperating with the National Times in the original story. Todd, Rawlings, Foster, and even Tim Chase had formulated a plan. Simply, they hoped to draw Rob Scott out by enraging him with the belief that the police were about to arrest Vic and not Tim Chase for the Lyman murder. Scott had come to Chase's mansion once to plant the knife, and they hoped he'd come back again, which he certainly had, meeting with the direst of consequences. Tim broke away from Todd, wondering outside where he sat on the low stone wall and buried his face in his hands. Was one of the most adored stars, wondered Todd, destined to be trapped in a bubble of loneliness, one from which he'd never be able to escape. Quite possibly. Rawlings came up behind Todd and took him by the hand. I checked on Geordie just a little while ago. He's awake now, and he's going to be okay. What happened? I got a statement this afternoon from the witness who tried to stop him from jumping, evidently. Geordie thought the guy was chasing him. Oh my God. So it was nothing. No one was after him? Right. Rawlings looked down, then raised his eyes. Are we okay, Todd? None of this was going to be easy. Not by any means, but he had to trust in one simple thing, and he said, I've always loved you, and I always will. And then we can start over? No, Rawlings. I don't want to start over. I don't want to go back to the beginning. Besides, I don't think we can. We've learned too much. Let's just keep on going from here, and eventually we'll get wherever we're supposed to. Do? You bet. From there, the night, of course, proceeded the way these things were wont to do. Foster and Rawlings rolled the Lyman case into this one, and they went about it all according to the book. First came the team from the Bureau of Investigation, who filmed and photographed, dusted and collected. And when they were done, several hours later, the medical examiner came and removed the body of Rob Scott, all of which was caught on film by the throng of media folk, smashed against the iron fence of the Mount Curve mansion, leased to movie star Tim Chase. By virtue of his promise to Tim, Todd gave up the story completely. In spite of that, WLAK management and every other reporter in town tried to get something out of Todd. Some kind of inside scoop. Some infinitesimal tidbit. But Todd was mum, completely so. In fact, he took the following week off and hid at Rawlings' duplex apartment, watching somewhat amusedly, yet ultimately sadly, as the truth was blotted out by a variation on the real story, cooked up by Tim Chase's publicity people, of course, and spread across the country and around the world. Fearing a psychotic fan, the star's spokesperson claimed actor Tim Chase proved himself a real-life hero, slipping his wife and son and nanny out of the house, then offering himself as bait for a police trap. The only quasi-mention of Todd was one journal, which stated that Chase had been warned of the danger by a local and unnamed television reporter. Yes, with headlines like, "A real-life action hero, Chase protects wife, son, and home from psycho stalker," the disinformation was gobbled up by Tim Chase's legions of fans, leaving Todd to wonder who were the real heroes and the real victims in this strange world. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.